Hello, Walter Merkis here. This is my program today for the Withum's annual Business and Finance Symposium, and I'm looking forward to talking today with you about ERP Success Playbook, strategy selection, and transformation. This is a little bit about me. I've been around the space for several years. I live my day-to-day job here as a technology strategist here at Withum, and I help our customers make more informed decisions about what solutions they might be working with. I spend a lot of time in process optimization. I'm a Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt, and I spend a lot of time with our customers helping improve and drive forward with where they need to go. So let me introduce today's topic. We're going to be doing a little bit of a framing of what we're working on, talking about ERP today. We're going to be looking at why transformations succeed and fail, and I'll try to share some stats with you, etc. And then we're really going to get into the vendor partnerships as they relate to a program. So setting the stage, ERP transformations are really high stakes. Depending on what study you look at in the marketplace, 55 to 75% of these ERP projects may or may not fail. Why? It usually comes down to the same themes. The same themes are truly lack of strategy alignment, weak governance, poor change management, over focus on tech, and underestimating, if you will, people and process readiness. This is why today we're walking through a structured ERP success playbook. We've designed these here at Withum to help our customers stand on the moon and look down at the transformation that's in front of them and make sure they're ready as they go through. I hope I'm going to cover some of the strategic alignment and governance, and I'm looking forward to answering questions as you get through all of these elements. I want to make sure that you're tying your ERP directly to your business goals, which is sometimes what I see in the marketplace that people don't do and companies don't do. We're going to look at process readiness and data management. We're going to ensure that the foundation is really solid. And next, we're going to look at what a vendor evaluation might look like. From evaluation through selection. Selection is a company process and what you might be doing in the future. An evaluation is what you do to get into that selection. Looking at integration in the architecture, we're going to spend some time talking about that. We're not going to geek out too much on the tech side, but we are going to spend some time at least looking at ERP as a digital backbone. Talk a lot about change. You'll hear me, say many times when I'm with my customers, nothing gets in the way of a good tech project like people. And we really have to understand people as we go through and look at these things. Implementation methodologies, what's right for you, what's not. This goes beyond agile and sort of waterfall, but this gets into a little bit about how we might phase, how we might do a big bang approach, etc. I'll talk a little bit about risk and cost. And then finally, what does post-go live support mean in continuous improvement? Once you go live, that's not the end of your project, and making sure that most people understand that and that you're really driving forward to what those future values might be. I want to emphasize that vendors are important partners here. Success is always owned by the organization and not necessarily by the vendor. And that's an important distinction as we go through and look at this. When we look at an ERP project lifecycle, there are many things to think about. Strategy and alignment. This is where every ERP journey must begin. Before we look at vendors or technology, we need to align the org on the why. What are the goals we're trying to achieve? How will we measure success? And do we have governance in place to make timely, informed decisions? Without this alignment, ERP projects often struggle. The team is working toward different objectives than what the business is looking for. Very important. Another aspect is the evaluation, selection, and procurement highlighted in blue on this slide. And this is once the strategy is clear, once you have your processes done, once you have your requirements gathered, you can then go to your vendors and your solutions and say, hey, what are we going to do with this project and what do you have? I really like a sort of guided discussion, meaning I like to provide demo scripts to our vendors when we're going through and doing our tech strat. And then once you come out of the demo script, I always allow opportunities for the future and that vendor to allow a moment in time for art of the possible, if you will. And that art of the possible allows the vendor, if you at that time, to sell their wares and say, if you go with us, not only can we meet your needs, but in the future, as you scale and grow even further, we might be able to do some other things. The other aspect that we add in here is procurement. I like to include it in most of our discussion points, although many of our customers are very solid at sort of, negotiating and procuring software. Sometimes it's good in the cloud environment to understand where you're going and how you're working on these things. So it's really important that you spend enough time on the procurement cycle to make sure that you're buying what you need, but you're also getting the right deal for your organization. When we look at design and build, highlighted now as we start to get into the actual project, so you bought your software, you're starting to think about what you're going. So with the mapping chosen, the solution chosen, what are we going to do with the organization? This is where business process mapping becomes critical. If what you're doing is adopting the ERP's business processes and you've made a choice and a conscious decision to do that, or have you pre-mapped and built out optimized processes that you're then going to map back? These are two different journeys that we will need to take during the design and build, and very important to take the time to go through this. Really, really pause here and think about how you're doing it. You want to make sure that you're translating your current and future state processes into the system in the right way. This is also the start of data prep, your configuration of the system, and building any necessary extensions that you need to think about. You need to get these things right. So if you don't have your data right and we don't know what our source is, we are going to probably clean up the chart of accounts. We are probably going to change the way you report and structure dimensions or segments, however, depending on the application you choose. But how are you going to do that? These are all parts of the design and build. We personally like a sign-off. Even when we use agile-esque approaches, we still like the, at the end of the design and the prototyping, we still like to get some form of either a signature or a yes, yay, nay, that we're going in the right direction. When you look at the implementation, before we get there, we have an alignment workshop that we use. I've put that in here. A lot of orgs do this, a lot don't. What we like about the alignment workshop here in between is we've done a design and build. We allow our customers time to think about what they just signed off on. And then when we get to the alignment workshop, it's really about, hey, are we in the right place to make these decisions? Have we thought through and included the necessary people and stakeholders when we're making these decisions? So you'll see that we've added one here. The implementation is really about taking hold of where you are. It's the transition from design into real world use. A lot of things go into this implementation bucket, and it's a large bucket. I could have added training. I could have added all of the different phases of implementation. We usually have in here UAT and validation and deployment and cutover plans, etc. I lumped all of that in today's discussion under implementation, and you'll see as we go through later on, I provide a checklist of some ideas and thoughts as we go through this. The goal here is that it's not just a flip a switch. You spend all this time on design, you spend all this time buying a new piece of software. Let's not just go quickly through here and rapidly get to an end game. So we really like to spend time here and really understand that you're confident and you're going to try to minimize the disruption to your organization as this new ERP takes hold of the future. The next few phases I have are really, I think, important and probably the most important. When you compare solutions, I don't want to say they're all the same because that's not the truth. But for your organization, there's going to be 2 or 3 solutions that if you picked any one of them, your path might be slightly different, but they're going to be similar and your chance of success is similar. So the technology, when you're picking at that right level and you're picking something that is right for you because you spent the time in that beginning phase, you're going to be able to get to where you need to get to make this thing work. But the adoption is something that is unique to you. So too many ERP projects underestimate this phase and don't spend enough time here. True success comes only when people adopt the system. Change management, training, reinforcement are critical. What I notice here is that a lot of times in the adoption phase, the executives are tired and fatigued from the organization trying to go through all of the change. The employees are tired and fatigued and tired of going through all this change. And this last mile is so important for the executive and leadership team to double down and really concentrate. Help your employees understand why this is important. Why did you just move them to new tools when the other thing that they were using was good enough? And you're going to hear a lot, we've always done it this way, why are we changing? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. All these different reasons why people don't want to change and they're resistant to change. Ensuring leadership models the behaviors and that drive adoption is critical. Optimization is another area that we like to talk about. I've added training and readiness assessment, and I will talk shortly about a readiness part to a project that we think is important. Optimization is here purely so that you'll understand it's the beginning of the next phase. All too often we see organizations, I get asked, when is my AI coming in? That's, probably in the last 6 months, the number one question. We're even gone past ERP now, and when's AI getting here? And so what we often say is AI can't get here until we get a good foundation. And so although we do add AI and we do very much a lot with analytics and automation and so help our customers drive through, we do that in the optimization phase and not up front in the early area of our deployment. So we spend a lot of time configuring and aligning to your process. Once we get them out of that, we like a stabilization period and we like to understand it. And we like to make sure that you're adopting the solution and really working well with the solution. So then we spend time, once we're done that training and readiness assessment, then we spend time getting into what we need to do in optimization. How are we going to evolve alongside the business? Looking for opportunities to improve, adding new capabilities, scaling, growth, AI, analytics, automation. Organizations that thrive on post-ERP are the ones that took a moment, took a breath, really thought through where they're going and didn't look at ERP as a one-time project, but rather as a living platform. So that was a lot to go through in the life cycle. As I switch gears a little bit here, ERP projects often fail. Why do projects fail? They fail typically from a lack of executive sponsorship. That's probably the number one reason. Executives get caught up in what they're working on and they forget that their people need them to guide and still drive forward. This is not a hierarchical or anything along them lines or authoritarian type thing. This is true leadership of somebody raising flags, really discussing the why and including their people in the why. And so ERP is going to be painful. It's going to be disruptive. It's going to change processes. It's going to change folks' roles and responsibilities. And they need a leader that's going to help them transfer and understand where they're going next. And a lot of times what we see here is that the leader is either caught up in their own world and not able to contribute, or they just haven't banked enough time. So in our organization, we tend to add 2 to 4 hours for our executive leaders. And during that time, we are expecting them to be actively part of the communication plan, active on meetings where the team needs to see them. And when we need a decision made, we're very much encouraging that decision to come from that group. This is true business transformation. Without a leader, it's very challenging. The other part is data. Data readiness is always a challenge. Poor data quality. The system could be absolutely perfect, but if the data is inconsistent, if it's incomplete, or you don't have an owner, the system won't deliver any reliable insights, and therefore you lose confidence early. And when your folks lose confidence early, as I went through the overview of the life cycle of a project, then you start to really challenge and second guess why you're here. And many people struggle at this point. So we start and suggest you start in the design phase with your data. The data is very early on, and you really are trying to understand it and get to a place where we can make it work. One of the things when we look at scope and understanding what can happen with scope creep, everyone has a wish list. And the danger comes here when nice to have features sneak into the project. Man, I really wish we had this. Or, hey, our current system, why are we upgrading? Our current system does this. Why wouldn't we just stick with what we have? And that scope creep is very important. So PMO, project managers, and folks involved, and a strong backbone in the leadership team is going to need to be at play here. We are going to phase this. We are going to go live with a viable product, maybe minimum viable product in some instances. And then once we're live, we'll start to add more things. So be really careful with scope creep. And don't assume because you've had a conversation, if it's not in the contract, it's not actually part of the project. So don't try to let conversations bring in scope. Insufficient change management, I've talked a lot about, I'm going to continue to talk about. We believe here that an implementation isn't about technology, it's about people. And if the users aren't prepared, if the users aren't trained, if the users aren't supported, adoption will suffer. And if adoption suffers, it becomes a leadership problem. So we actively encourage our leaders and our PMO groups to be strong during the process to make sure that change is upon you, changes upon your folks, and that you're actively supporting them and investing heavily in training. And there is no too much training. We really have to do this. We use techniques like lunch and learns. We use techniques like war room after, so where we'll order in food and there's a drop in, and you can drop in on anything, any issues you have in that first week. Those techniques work really well because people feel supported. And the best thing that can happen is you invest in that 1 week of 1 hour and your consulting team is sitting in there waiting for folks and nobody shows. That could be A, problematic, or B, the best thing you ever hope for because everybody's ready and they're working through and doing their thing. Misaligned expectations with vendors. When we're doing project recovery work, the number one by far is lack of executive leadership. The number two is that the company thought they were getting X and the vendor thought they were delivering Y, and they're not even close to each other. So making sure that you're aligned in your expectations with what you're going to deliver is important. One of the next things, if we transition it a little bit, that's been a negative opening, if you will, to the lessons learned. But what are some of the common ways that we are successful, that we're seeing success in the marketplace? How do we flip the risks into opportunities? Strong governance and clear ownership. Hopefully you've heard that loud and clear, and I'll continue to say that throughout the rest of my presentation today. Early and often on the data strategy, you can't get in there ahead of time enough. We have to have clean data going in, otherwise you'll have lost confidence. Phased scope with business value. Prioritize what delivers the most value first. You'll hear a KPI that I often use in our ERP delivery, which is time to value. And what we're really trying to do is get our customers to a place where we are at a place where we're delivering value and value that the business actually wanted, not just going live with something. Sometimes a skinny ledger is what we want to go with, meaning we're going to go with just AR, AP, GL and be able to do journal entries and not even transactions. But it is so bad today that we had to start with some of those things. Whatever it is for you, whatever, make sure that that phasing is a conversation and try to avoid big bang where you can. Totally appreciate big bang is necessary and a part and a reason it's there. But wherever possible, try to make your scope one that doesn't allow you to sort of overextend yourself. Embed change management. I think that's so important. Continuous communication and trust with your partners. Really, truly partner with the vendors that you're working with. Understand that they're not going to be perfect and understand that your team's not going to be perfect, but somewhere in the middle, you're going to get there. And so by encouraging the right behaviors in this continuous communication and trust is going to go a long way. So in short, in closing of this, ERP success is less about technology and more about people, process, and governance. And by avoiding some of these pitfalls and embedding the success factors, organizations dramatically increase their chances of turning ERP into true business transformation. When we look at future-proofing ERP investments, and we look at sort of ways to pick up on the theme of being seen, ERP being seen as a system or software that manages finance, operations, and reporting, versus it is only that. An ERP is the backbone that's going to support your business and how it evolves. Let's look at why ERP is more than just a system. So I've already sort of alluded to several reasons why ERP is more than a system, but that foundational system will allow you to drive AI and automation, which will transform the ERP from reactive to proactive. You know, we'll see like a global manufacturer, for example, using predictive analytics in their ERP to flag when equipment maintenance is due before a breakdown occurs. So although this is a common use case today for AI, we're seeing it more and more. It's these kinds of things where if I don't have a maintenance schedule inside my ERP or a system to track some of these things, I can never truly get to predictive. What we'll notice is a lot of my customers will ask me for the AI before they have the ERP or before they're gathering the data, and just use AI to gather that data. And I think that's another common mistake that we're seeing in the marketplace. Analytics, dashboards, real-time actionable decision making. Executives no longer want to wait until month end now to get be on track and get the information they need to make their decisions. They are expecting information early and often. They're using more rules of thumb than they've ever used in the past. Compliance and regulatory reporting for GAAP, for IFRS, for Department of Labor, et cetera, across all sorts of areas, requirements around payroll, around benefits, workforce reporting. Whatever your example is, compliance and regulatory reporting is at the forefront and should be a very plausible idea coming out of your ERP. Modular cloud platforms and scalability and integration. The old ERP story was about big monolithic systems. You know, when I first started in the ERP game, large products, we used to do very large ERP systems. But today, you're seeing more of a modular approach, more of I can add this and I don't need everything. So a fast-growing tech startup, if you will, can use the same core ERP that a very large org will do, and it can add HR, CRM, customer support, or anything else along the way as they grow and get better. So they can do this without a huge disruptive overhaul. And then these smaller organizations and larger organizations alike are actually driving through and using similar product with similar outcomes. Resilient supply chains. This is another big area. As we look at the market, the economy shifts, the impact on the supply chain, the tariffs, I'm going on and on. We can talk about how supply chain has changed, but the ERP will be pivotal to helping your organization add, if you're going down a free trade zone type embarkment, so you're adding FTZ to your warehouse, or you just want better landing costs or controls, etc. All those things need to be thought through as you look at this. So in closing, the message here is this: ERP should evolve with your business, not lag behind it. I think that's a very key term. When it's treated as a living platform, ERP doesn't just manage today's operations. It positions and helps you thrive into the future. This slide, while we start to think about it, is really the first topic of what we're hoping to accomplish today. So when I look at strategic alignment and governance, an ERP requires many things. So let's dig into the details a little as we consider an ERP as not just an IT project, but rather a business transformation. When you embark on an ERP transformation, you're really taking on 4 big initiatives. We're likely going to convert finance in some way, shape, or form. We are going to look at our customer and order management integration, whether that's a front end or front of the office to the back of the office, however you interpret that, e-com into the ERP, et cetera. A lot of Shopify customers or BigCommerce, et cetera, coming in. Supply chain visibility, how can I see it? How can I optimize and look at the procurement of delivery and to delivery? And then the last force is the workforce. Are we digitizing things? Is HR in here? Is payroll in here? Those are the 4 main key areas. Here's the kicker. Even with these powerful initiatives and the whole organization on these, approximately 72 to 77% from a Gartner study of these organizations believe executive sponsorship is the single most important success factor. I started with it early and often because I believe that that is a gap, and one certainly that we see, but I also wanted to make sure that in here that you were hearing it loud and clear. An executive sponsor is there to ensure accountability, not just for themselves, but across the board. Steering committees, we like steering committees. Hey, for some of you smaller organizations, it could be a steering group. It could be a PMO or a group that pulls away from the project and is allowed to make decisions and look at things holistically across the organization rather than self-serving. Self-serving might be a COO who needs a very particular thing sits on the committee. And if that COO is the loudest voice, then that COO likely will win all of the aspects. A steering committee takes the loudest voice in the room out and allows you to move it. For many of you, I'm assuming you've heard of the RACI model, and so the RACI model is very important. We use it a fair amount: responsible, accountable, consulted, informed. There's other variations. There's more modern variations that add a few letters in here, etc. But a real example here might be around financial reporting. And the controller is responsible, the CFO is accountable, business unit leader is consulted, and the PM ERP vendor might be informed. So the responsible one is the person who does the work: finance team, ERP consultant, etc. Accountable, who owns the decision. Consulted, who provides input, business leaders, auditors, ERP partner, whomever. And then informed really is who needs visibility, users, department heads, etc. Without governance, ERP projects drift, stall, costly rabbit holes. You've probably heard the gamut. So how do we think of executive sponsor? We like to say it's the project GPS. No GPS, the car doesn't drive. The GPS doesn't drive the car. However, it does make sure that the driver stays on course, points out hazards, recalculates when needed, etc. So without that executive sponsor, you're at risk of detours, dead ends, and maybe even not reaching your destination, which would be, detrimental. When we look at process readiness and data foundations, I think this is a very, first of all, I'll start with a light slide and then I'll get to a checklist here shortly. But when you look at sort of the, readiness and data and how we might get there, the ERP is not a band-aid for broken processes. If we go live without addressing the root causes of inefficiency, all we've really done is automate bad habits. There's other terms in here, but make sure that you're actually looking at things and you're spending the time necessary. This is why readiness is so important. We spend a lot of time up front before you even buy software to make sure that you're in the right place and really working through what you need to. Let's talk about data. I think I mentioned data before. I'm going to mention it again. Right? Your checklist has to include data. It's one of the biggest reasons ERP projects stumble. Duplicates, poor ownership, bad quality data, incorrect. These issues sink timelines and frustrate users. From a consulting aspect, data migration might well be the black hole of consulting, as I can't tell you if migrating over from a customer list of 5,000 will take 15 minutes to collate it, put it together versus 10 hours because the data is so bad we have to work with it. The good news here is that an organization investing in the data cleansing upfront dramatically reduces migration headaches. We love to see people do like 6-month program on cleaning up their data before they even start ERP, 3-month, 1 month, etc. And what ends up happening is they'll hire interns or other methods to help them clean up their data, walk through a process. And also on the governance side, what we generally help with is identifying process owners, who's going to take accountability, defining the KPIs that measure success, set data standards, and really make a data-driven organization. During the pre-ERP phase, before we even think about buying software, we work with our clients to do these things. Critical step into moving forward and working with our customers. We like to engage vendors or start the implementation early so that the organization isn't just ready technically, but they've also culturally and strategically started to think about it. And so we really do think that the checklist here, I've got a rudimentary checklist here, but we think this checklist is so important for you. And anybody who wants a more detailed copy of the checklist, you just reach out and I'll happily share it. But before selecting the ERP, it's important you look at these 3 areas: people, process, data. You're already changing your technology, so I've left technology out of that arm. But on the process side, we like to see things documented. We like to make sure we understand. I generally do a few interviews with a few of the process leaders or the business process owners, depending on what your organization calls these folks. And I spend time trying to understand if they truly know their business. And it's not a judgment thing. It's more about, can they articulate the path that they're trying to go to? Or what they are articulating is they've been in that role for 20 years and they only can tell me what they've done in the past, and they can't tell me where they want to go. So very important when we're working with our customers that we too have an opinion as we sit here on the discussion points. On the data side, we've talked data a lot, and you're going to hear every time I put something together, you'll see that we have data at the forefront. So here's a simple checklist that I'm sharing with you, and again, I'll happily share it as part of the follow-up. If we get these things right up front, the ERP project has a solid foundation instead of carrying old problems into a new system, which is sometimes what ends up happening. As we think of vendor evaluation and selection, and please note the order of those words, a selection is a decision that you will make, and an evaluation is what you and your team will do. So it's very important that you take the time to walk through this. When we look at implementation partners, managed services, even niche add-ons or technical vendors or software providers or any of the people that are involved, we want to make sure that we evaluate them holistically. All are important, but for today's discussion, I'm going to narrow to the two primaries, the solution vendor and the implementation partner. The solution vendor might be, Microsoft Business Central. It might be NetSuite. It might be Sage Intacct. It could be Acumatica, etc. Your implementation partner may or may well be part of that solution, meaning some of those organizations actually deliver on their own. And sometimes you may want to go externally or work with an existing partner that you may have in the ecosystem. Too often, selection focuses solely on the vendor. So like a NetSuite or Business Central or Workday, with decisions made on cost over feature checklists. This approach is transactional in nature and typically run by a lot of the sales organizations versus someone who is actually looking at the customer and truly trying to get them over the line. The size of the project doesn't matter. We need time to value. We need our to think about our customers and really drive through. And you as a customer are going through this journey need to think through, where am I going to get to? And I need to think of my people. The people need to be at the forefront. One of the things that's important is that you don't get hung up in the end of the month sales cycles of the software organizations. At the end of the month, you'll get a deal. I can assure you that the beginning of the following month, if you want to sign with that vendor, you likely will get a similar deal. And any nuanced discount beyond that you wouldn't get, say, next month because of a timestamp or a sales technique is likely either putting undue pressure on you, or B, the value of what that discount is not going to be offset by what you might lose by going too quick. Take your time. Dollars are important, but first let's get the project right. Then let's determine the biggest and best negotiation tactics to procure your solution. When we work with our customers, we spend a lot of time thinking through the procurement side and understanding what they are. We call this affectionately an options to consider, but what are your options to consider? When we look at emphasizing broader criteria, we look at implementation methodology, industry expertise and scalability, partnership dynamics. We really want to understand this with our vendors. In contrast, we want to be clear about where we're going. Poor alignment leads to scope creep, finger pointing, project delays. Let's partner with these vendors. Let's really think where we're going. And finally, remember the total cost of ownership. Although this is not just about licenses, right? Total cost of ownership would include the implementation, the integrations, the training, the support, the continuous improvement needed as you move your way along. Both the solution vendor and the implementation partner influence this cost. So we typically leverage a 5-year calculator. Again, if you're interested, I'm happy to share our assets with you, but it's just a spreadsheet. It's a fancy spreadsheet, but it's a spreadsheet. And what we do with this spreadsheet is we really do hunker down and try to understand what that cost might be. It doesn't really drive any KPIs at this point in terms of what KPIs are right or what you're thinking are the ones, but it is helpful to understand where you're going. And when our clients aren't sure of what technology is right for them, we move maybe sometimes into this options to consider, as I had talked about. When they do know, so sometimes our customers come to me and they'll say, hey, we want to try NetSuite or we want to try Microsoft. We can do a why not NetSuite sort of approach, and the assessment changes, even though it's still kind of a fit gap or options to consider. What we do is, what are the things that will break in this ERP? And we look for potential gaps in the solution alignment so that when we go into it, we end up in a better place. Technology integration and architecture, I think, is very interesting. It really truly is what connects the supply chain to HR, to customer data, etc. And you'll hear us talk Some of the applications will say unified or fully integrated, etc. Whatever your term is, we like to see movement of data across platform through integrations rather than manual movement. So one of the first big decisions you're going to make is whether you're going to go on-prem, hybrid, cloud, etc. We predominantly deal today with cloud software. I think that approach is well known in the ecosystem, and most folks are moving down that pathway. When you look at integrations, you still need APIs. We see something called middleware now, which is becoming more prominent, things like Celigo, that sit between two systems and allow you to sort of communicate between two systems and extend your stretch through. It also allows, we use it a lot in the leaving legacy systems connected. So if we're doing a phased approach, maybe you're doing ARPGL, and then we'll leave a legacy system connected. We'll connect using Celigo temporarily while we then rationalize that system in the future once the phasing's done and we've gone live with the ERP. And it's a little more casual in terms of approach. Implementation choices vary a lot. And so Withum typically recommends letting the phase rollout like I talked about versus a big bang. However, we still see it in this place. We still see about 20%, give or take, using a big bang approach. It allows for faster time to value and allows users to adopt the new solution when you use a phased approach. It allows for upskilling. It allows for a bigger part of your subsequent optimization phases to be pulled in later when you're stabilized and more standard. When you look at backing yourself or customizing yourself into a corner because you took on too much early, sometimes that can be problematic and you can end up in a troubling situation. When we come in sometimes, what we've noticed is we've actually ended up having to re-implement systems because they've got it wrong or they customize themselves into a corner. Not uncommon to see that. Sad, but not uncommon. Ultimately, and in closing on this slide, ERP should serve as a flexible backbone, cloud-first, integration-ready, implemented in a way that balances speed with your adoption expectations. You can't go so fast and then your people aren't ready, or if your people are really, really ready and you're going too slow. All those things can cause grief and be another obstacle of growth. Very important to sort of think those things through. Change we've talked a lot about here as I continue to move my way down through here, but there's nothing that gets in the way of a good technology project quite like people, right? The pun I used earlier. The software doesn't really resist change if you think about it. It's people who do. We've always done it this way. It's why change management is consistently one of the top ERP success or failure. We believe that we bake it right into our PMO, and then we believe an organization with a solid change management plan, communication plan, and investment in their people in terms of training is key. About 60% of organizations say an effective stakeholder communication is the most critical factor. That's from Gartner as well, getting it right. The best practices are really straightforward. Use a framework. ProSci, ADKAR, Cotter's 8 steps. Although I personally prefer ProSci, there are many people that use Cotter's 8 steps. And in fact, when I first started, Cotter's was sort of one of the ones that was there. Then the advent of ADKAR, and then ProSci is now certification that continues to grow and build out. Train your people by role or persona instead of one size fits all. What you'll see is we have global training for everybody. So we bring our inventory specialists with our CFO, with our controller, put them all in the room and say, learn. Well, the reality is we're not helping them through their day-to-day job. We're not helping them move. The real secret here is reinforce adoption continuously after go live. Do not underinvest in training and reward adoption. Not uncommon for us to see gift cards or something along them lines. And people who have ideas and are willing to share them, encourage this. Just like going to the gym, one training session doesn't get you in shape. It's really the repetition and reinforcement that will build the muscle of adoption. Withum, again, as I said earlier, Withum uses the ProSci approach. We collaborate with our clients on communication plans, training materials. Sometimes we make a blog, depending on the size of the organization, and that blog is really dedicated towards helping people understand what we're working on. There is no shortcut to adoption. That's full stop, and what we need to think about. When we think of the implementation approach and we start to think about what this means from an ERP implementation, one of the most critical decisions you'll make is the rollout. No one size fits all as you determine your scope, your timeline, your budget. There is a smarter way to manage risk and drive adoption. And that is really what the point of this slide is. I've used the term here MVP, or minimum viable product, but viable product for sure should be used. So what is minimum viable product is really meant when somebody comes to me and says, I need to go live by X date. We need to be live by November 1st, or etc. And we're already in September. So minimum viable at best is what they get. If they're willing to wait a little bit more, maybe we get better and a more viable product versus a minimum viable product. So it's keys like this that are very important. We typically see 3 rollout stages. We see the big bang approach, we see a phased approach, we see a hybrid. Phase I've talked a lot about. I believe there's a ARAP GL plus inventory, say for example, as a really good option for an inventory-esque or a wholesale distribution company to consider. And then maybe I add the front end on later or whatever. We can talk more about those things depending on your organization. Big bang for me is one that I generally try to talk most of our customers out of. There is generally something that won't go right. There are reasons why we need big bang. End of life, software's not working, carve outs, M&A activities, etc. There's reasons we need to take a company and move it completely forward. But for the most part, there's typically an MVP type approach, even in the situations I just referred to. So sometimes we'll use a hybrid where we have a common middle ground. You launch the core, like finance, procurement, or whatever else you want to consider in the core, and then you layer in add-ons like CRM and HR and advanced analytics as a future spot. Especially SMBs need to consider these things. Phased or hybrid approach is the sweet spot. We tend to see that all too often the longer ones, the 3 to 9, while enterprises might take 6 to 18. We tend to see folks try to overconsume, stress their people, and actually end up in change fatigue. And the failure is not because they did anything wrong, it's because their people didn't adopt and they couldn't get there. So phasing has more than just features and functions that go into that decision. And really it's back to making sure you don't over customize too early or try to boil the ocean, as my team will tell you that I say often, and probably too often. Give your teams time to learn, to adapt, and let them contribute to future phases. When folks contribute, they are part of the story and the narrative, and they're not part of the demise. So help them understand that they are part of tomorrow. And when they feel that way, then they actually are contributing, and you'll see a much better and stronger outcome, and likely a stronger finish to that. As we go into the implementation methodologies, and we start to think through what some of these implementation methodologies look like, get into production faster and learn real usage. We always look at what the different approaches are and how they offer different strengths. The best fit depends on your organization, your size, your complexity. What's your appetite for change? Are you a change-driven organization, or are you, stuck in the, hey, this is the way we've always done it and we're not going to change? And there's no judgment there, but be honest and truthful about where you are in that journey. So some of the ones we typically use, waterfall. We still use waterfall a fair amount. I'd like to say we don't, but we generally do, especially if we have some tough things. My only challenge with waterfall is I kick the feature sets down the line all the way almost to the end. So by the time I get to the end and I get a signature and people are starting to use it and I get to my UAT, it's been a long time since when we designed it. And people seem to forget. We use something called a boardroom pilot in these, and sometimes they forget what happened during the whole life cycle of the engagement. Agile really does flip that model. We like Agile. It's fast, it's flexible, it's great. good for small, good for mid-size. It really is important that your organization meet the consulting organization head to head. So if the consulting organization is putting 10 hours on a sprint, then you are putting 10 or more hours on that sprint. So very important. Agile doesn't work if it's a one-sided relationship. So it really is important. One-sided relationships, more traditional. Consulting drives, client listens. That would be more on the waterfall side. Hybrid is where what our methodology is built on here at Withum. And so a hybrid really is where most organizations try to land, combines waterfall planning with Agile's flexibility. I still like to see data sign-offs. I still like to see my integration sign-offs, and I have like phase sign-offs and see it. Even though I might work on those things in an Agile nature through sprints, I still like to get signatures and make sure that we're moving forward on those things. So that way a data sort of project or part task is not behind on the integration and vice versa. So the dependency is that the integration is in place and then I can validate that my data came over right. If I don't integrate those two things and get sign off on those things, then one of the tasks falls short or may be missed altogether. Finally, we talked about MVP. I continue to talk about it. Regardless of what role, don't over engineer. Don't try to move forward too quickly. Minimum viable product is very important to think about it. Avoid over customizing early. Don't redo what you're doing today. Don't take your ERP that you're now swapping to a brand new ERP, and don't take all those same processes and just lift and shift. Think that through and understand it. The bottom line here, the right methodology will help you balance speed, balance risk. It makes you more adaptable if you use the right methodology for your organization, and it'll help the ERP rollout support the transformation, not the disruption side. This is a transformation. It will be painful. You need to think about it, but if we openly talk about it, we're in a better place. And as mentioned earlier, we tend to talk MVP with the hybrid deployment model. It tracks to in-flight with hard signatures for design, data to maintain governance like I talked about in these critical areas. You cannot over-communicate during the deployment. Allow users to self-access information and get as much detail as they need to be successful moving forward. Risk, cost, and go-live success. When you look at this is a pretty busy slide. There's a lot of detail that you'll be able to come back to and review here after, but a project carries a lot of risks. We all know this too well. Scope, creep, migration. I talked about a lot of these earlier. Mid-sized firms spend around 3 to 5% of their revenue. Large firms 2 to 3%. Now, that's a generic number. Depending on what industry you're in, healthcare, we're seeing these numbers in the 4 to 5%, maybe 6%, and in maybe some of the lower areas, we're seeing closer to 2 to 3%. Just depends on the industry you're in. But here's the good news: when ERP is done right, ERP delivers. 95% of organizations can report that process improvement, and most see a return on investment in about 2.5 years. These benefits are tangible, and when you look at PE firms and portfolio companies and M&A activity, one of the first things they're trying to do is put in that ERP so that they can get the value out of that, and then obviously moves that into the transaction. It becomes a cash piece. But in an organization that's owning and using the ERP, that value is still there, and that value then brings you a more return. The key here is that you go slow, think it through, and train your people. Once our go live is at the finish line and you are there, it's not, you're not done yet. It really just is the end of the first lap. Moving into hypercare, stabilization, continuous improvement, this is where you really do get the ROI and where it compounds, and it really does start to go. You move simply from running on ERP to optimizing ERP. You can then layer in your automation. You can layer in your analytics. You can look for new functions and features that can be added in. So the message really at the end of the day on this slide is about the real value comes from building a culture and a plan around continuous optimization. Don't get stuck in the we're done. This is where we're at. So in closing, I wanted to just sort of talk a little bit about recapping the ERP success. It follows a clear playbook. This is what we call our playbook above. We want to ensure that strategy, readiness, vendor selection, change, implementation, optimization, all of the things that I highlighted in this playbook are there. ERP is more than technology, which I've tried to really talk about. It really is enterprise-wide transformation. Organizations that succeed are the ones that invest in alignment and readiness and trusted partners with continuous improvement and investment at the back end, not one lab and done. You really are looking at the future. At Withum, we help organizations not just implement ERP, but rather transform through it. If you'd like to take our ERP readiness survey or you want to start a conversation, happy to do so. My contact information's here and happy to help you navigate your digital transformation. Love to partner with you. Thank you.